to put on a health program, for them to suddenly say, there's got to be some cognitive dissonance if they're then saying, but it's okay for the government to have the right to, beat you up for 3 hours or put you in solitary confinement for 20 days. No, of course not. To me, it's an issue of power. I think it's a similar thing to slavery in that respect of this arrogation of total control over another human being. So that would be how I would answer.
It's why we're trying to do. This movie is trying to address that in a way.
I mean, and in addressing it from a religious,
right?
From a religious. I mean, I see. Yeah. I mean, basically, I like that take. I think the religious aspect is also very important for outreach to a conservative majority that does not agree with us. Right? And the third one, which hadn't occurred to me until you mentioned it right now, was invoking George Washington, right? But in a different sort of way. The very notion of American exceptionalism that allows people to say, well, the International Criminal Court shouldn't apply to us because we're America. That same sort of exceptionalism with just a slightly different version. This is America. We don't do that sort of thing. Look, George Washington. Isn't
the slave owner?
Is yet well, yeah. But if you're looking at who you're trying to persuade,
I know.
Right?
It actually, the polls have shown that's a very persuasive argument.
Right. So between the notion that government shouldn't do that, right, for the anti-government buffs, right? This I think very powerful religious argument against it, right? And maybe a slightly different take on American exceptionalism. Combined can help to persuade. But man, I admire what you're doing, because this is not an easy persuasion job.
You know what else has happened is some polls show that the older you are, the more against torture you are. The younger you are, the more you're willing to accept it in certain circumstances. So the younger people, and that may be an influence of 24. I don't know.
But I bet it has to do with they have less experience of pain in their lives.
Yeah, or trauma. Yeah, the reality of it.
If you're younger, you
don't
haven't had
see it. You don't get it.
Painful, physically painful experience.
But anyway, some polls have shown that that's another factor, which is also a concern with 0 Dark 30, because it reinforces then what a lot of young people are seeing, that young adults, and it's
that was one of the
another reason why we're doing the Fact Not Fiction campaign, to try to get this message out.
What you just mentioned, that was one of the concerns that even with CARE we noticed after 0 Dark 30 came out. A lot of people, a lot of Americans and non-Americans actually, they sympathized with torture. They sympathized with the practice of torture. They felt that it was acceptable. They felt that, we want to kill Muslims, or we hate Arabs. I had friends who, when they went to theaters to watch the movie, like my friends who wore headscarves, or their husbands who had beards, or what have you, who were visibly either Muslim or who appeared to be Muslim, they were subjected to commentary. They were subjected to, one of my friends, she wore a headscarf, her headscarf was pulled during the movie. I didn't see it myself, and I don't think I'm ever going to see it, because I don't have the stamina to watch those kind of movies. But there was definitely an increase in anti-Muslim sentiment from this movie. And that was one of our concerns, because if you're showing a movie that's saying that it's okay to practice torture, to use that as a technique to elicit confessions from suspects, then you're basically saying that, you're saying that it's okay that, Muslims can also be subjected to these kind of ideologies, or they can be subjected to hate crimes, or to name calling, or what have you. So that was definitely
one key element to torture is that you have to, in order to execute torture, you have to treat the person you're torturing as the other. They're not a human being. They're somebody that you really don't care about. I mean, at all. That they don't merit. And that's what President Bush actually said, that these people are so outside the law that they're not covered by the Geneva Conventions. They're not human beings, essentially, was the message. So that otherness is a critical component to committing torture. You wouldn't torture people like you. You know, that's,
Well, you can sympathize with her,
Correct.
you acknowledges.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One other thought, as I was thinking about the notion of other, right? I mean, I'm still going on these continuing ways in which
I love it.
I mean, because it's fundamentally, I see this as a mission to persuade
Right.
a more conservative majority that does not agree, right? Now, on a fundamental moral issue that you don't get to, usually you don't see that much movement on, in the same way that you wouldn't expect to see much movement on the abortion debate. Another one is you know, if one side uses the extreme notion of, you know, well, if we don't torture this time, you know, the nuclear bomb will go off, right? The ticking time bomb scenario. I mean, there are equally powerful, you know, exaggerated claims that can be made on our side too, right? That, you know, you know, so can you torture the guy's daughter, right? I mean, you know, what are you willing to do? How far are you willing to go? These are arguments that make us sure. I mean, for the same reason, I don't even want to make those arguments for the same reason I don't want that you and I have not actually gone to see Zero Dark 30. It's not something we want to do. But I you know, I'm still I'm looking at this as so far the best tool we've got out there. Thank you again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I keep looking for other tools for this.
Well, another tool is the commentary by our military leaders. Petraeus, 100% against torture. It hurts the troops. It puts the soldiers in jeopardy. It creates the enemy. It fires up the enemy. It's the wrong thing. Stanley McChrystal, absolutely. It caused the death of many, many soldiers because we were torturing.
Can you line up military leaders the way you've been able to line up religious leaders?
Yes. There's an organization called Human Rights First, which has worked with a very large contingency of retired military types.
Can you help them make a movie?
And I don't know if they've done a movie. They've done a lot of letters. They've done a lot of meetings. They met with all the presidential candidates back in 2004 and 2008. That is their track is the military leadership.
I mean,
So I mean, it's a very good
track.
track, and it's a very powerful message, and it's accurate. I mean, we just know that. That's reality, is that it has caused us so much harm in terms of lost lives and mistreatment of our own soldiers. Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts. One is that we talk about the American people changing their opinions as if it's the ordinary man on the street, but if you look at, it's really coming down from the top as well. People are just responding to what they hear in the media, and if you look at the parts of the media that try to appeal to quote-unquote educated people, like the Washington Post. The Washington Post has gone really reactionary on issues like these in the past 10 years. I've seen editorials in the Washington Post basically defending movies like Zero Dark 30 because they effectively endorse torture. And A.O. Scott, who's the movie reviewer, I think he's like the dean of the National Movie Critics Association, and
For the New York Times.
works for the New York Times. And of course, you know, New York's a city with a lot of Holocaust survivors in it. He came on TV and said that Zero Dark 30 was a fascist movie, and despite that, it was his favorite movie of the year. And they said something similar about the movie 300, but that's kind of irrelevant. But the point is, when people are willing to say that, and they're not criticizing it for being a fascist movie, they're saying, it's fascist, but that's okay, I'm open-minded.
I heard similar reviews like that.
Yeah.
Getting back, just another point on how to talk about torture, and this is a little bit on its effectiveness or its utility, but it's interesting how we got into this torture program was there were a couple of psychologists in, who brought this torture program to the military and the CIA. And what they did was, they had been part of the program to train Navy SEALs on how to withstand torture. So if you're caught and you're gonna be tortured, you know, this is what we know. And they basically used what happened in North Korea, what the North Koreans did to our soldiers during the Korean War, to the pilots that were downed. And so and that included waterboarding. Waterboarding was a big part of that and a bunch of other things. And so they took this program and said, well, let's use some of these techniques for our torture program. And that's how it developed, from these Korean torture techniques. The interesting part about that was, the Korean torture techniques were developed to get the person to such a point that they would say anything that the North Korean wanted them to say. Because that was where they'd put them on video and then have them say, they're, you know, America's a terrible country and I don't want to go home, or whatever they had to say. So the whole purpose of these techniques was to make these people like putty, that you could mold them, not to get to the truth. The whole purpose was not to find truth, but to get compliance. And that's just a fact.
And we're back to the it doesn't work.
I know, but I'm just
No,
giving you
but-
that as an interesting piece of information, because it is
But-
pretty interesting. That we had
Well,
it's
it's
kind of
true.
like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
When